Hello, everybody. How are you? My name's Eric Garside. I'm the Director of Engineering at Freshly in America, and this is...
I'm Garth, and I'm the engineering manager at Freshly. And I guess I wanted to start talking first with a little bit of, well, I kind of wanted to get a little bit of feedback from you first and find out what exactly you guys want to find out from us. I definitely want to, there's some things I want to talk about, but I want to find out what exactly you guys want to get out. What do you want to hear from us? So is there anything anybody wants to know? For sure, like, is there anything anybody wants to get out of this? Did you know that we were coming? Because I just found out like an hour ago, so that's cool if you didn't know. No? Okay, well, that's all right. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand at like any time and ask, like interrupt me, that's fine. No one's gonna make you do push-ups. So, I heard that was a thing here. So, all right, well, do I have to use this microphone? Is it like important to the YouTube thing? Yeah, okay, that's all right. So, there's a couple things we wanted to talk about. I guess the first thing would be when you're first joining an organization when you leave here. So just so you guys know, I'm going to talk a little bit about the skills you have outside of the technological skills, and he's going to bring you up about maybe the stuff you're more curious about, the tech side of things. So I'll let him talk about so you'll be engaged and be looking forward to his side. So, but when when you join a new company, there's a lot of things to absorb in the beginning. And we want to all, I want to talk about the things that your managers are looking for from you, and they're probably not the things that you expect. And I think that is the biggest thing. So I didn't have a ton of time to prepare for this, so I'm going to go off my head a little bit, but I think the biggest things are, and I'm sure this isn't a big thing for you, but the biggest things in the beginning are just being professional, right? So making sure that you're showing up to meetings on time and doing all that stuff. And from what I hear from the way you guys run this camp is, if you're the kind of person that shows up to meetings and stuff late, you're probably not going to make it through here. But that is, nonetheless, that's super important. All those like little professional things, showing up to on time and making sure that you are responding to people quickly, and all those little things make everyone else's job a lot easier, which makes everyone else is going to think you are more competent because of that. Everyone else is going to think your skills are better because of that. So that's a huge thing, and surprisingly is just not that common. So that's a really important thing. So beyond that, once we get your manager, the next thing that they're going to want to look for is someone that not necessarily can deliver great code and all that kind of stuff, because they're going to know, like, you're a junior developer and you're going to go from being a junior developer to and they're going to want to level you up to where you need to be. So what they're really looking from you is, can you make a commitment and can you stick to that commitment? Right? And that may sound like, oh, of course, that's common sense. But if I asked you, how long is that code that you're writing going to take right now, do you think you could give me a perfect answer of how long it's going to take? And that's really hard, right? That's one of the hardest things we can do. So the secret with this is, and this is like gold that I'm giving you right here, right now. So I don't know if that translates well. This is really important, what I'm saying right now. So is that you can just make sure that every commitment you give, you can definitely deliver on. So in other words, the thing I always say to everyone that works for me is under promise and over deliver. And a lot of people say that, but a lot of people don't do it. Because as humans, we always want to please people. Eric's my boss. And, I always want to be like, oh, yeah, Eric, I'll do that. I'll get everything you've done. You say, right? There's a part of me that wants to say that to him. But then I have to check myself and say, you know what? I can only do this. I can only promise that I'm going to get this done this week. And if I get more than that, and in my head I'm thinking, I may be able to get those other things too, but I'm not going to tell him I'm going to do those. And if I get him, he's going to be excited, and that'll work out great. So that's the mentality you need to have, because then you can continuously impress your boss with how much more you're getting done than you promised that person, instead of the opposite. And that's all it is. It's just instead of, so you're constantly managing up. You're telling your boss, so it's kind of and it seems strange, well, I can only get this much done. It seems like your boss will be telling you how much to do. That's maybe not how it works in the real world. Does that make sense? All right, cool. So that, I think, is like the number one important thing. So we all are setting good expectations for ourselves, and we all are, you know, how did I put it? The setting, exceeding what? No.
Exceeding expectations?
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. So anyway, so what we want, so that's number 2. So being professional, and then setting the low. I don't want to say setting the bar low, but
Be realistic with it.
yeah, be realistic. Be below realistic, and that way you can exceed and make your boss happy all the time. So beyond that, then, and you know what? You can be upfront about that. Like I tell him all the time, I'm gonna promise less than I'll probably deliver, and he's fine with that, because at least then I'm reliable. I'm always delivering what I say, and he knows that, right? Are you happy with that?
Every time.
There you go. There's your proof.
Yeah.
There you go. All right, perfect. So, the other things that we can do besides that is, let me see, beyond that, the next important thing would be, I think, working with, when you come into a new team, you know, there's making your manager happy, and then there's working with your team really well. So being a good team member means different things in different teams, but that responsiveness to the other people in your team, so whether you work on a distributed team and you're in Slack, or whether you're doing pull requests, making sure that you're putting your team members' pull requests first before you're on code, because we all want to work on that feature that we're working on, and that's the thing that we're thinking about in the shower, right? We're not thinking about the pull requests we have to do. So what we want to do is what we want to do is when we first get into work, we want to do those pull requests and make sure, because somebody else is waiting for us on those type of things. So does everybody know what I'm talking about when I say that? Yeah, raise your hand if you know. Nobody wants to raise their hand. Okay, so what I'm talking about is when like I write a feature, I can't merge it in unless he reviews my code first, right? And vice versa. So if I write some code and he has to review it, and I'm waiting for him to review it, but he's writing another feature, I don't like that, right? And I don't mean, I'm just using us examples like we were coworkers. So if if somebody's waiting for you to review their code, make sure you do that first. So any kind of communication is what my bottom line is between you and your teammates, even if it's not another coder, if it's a project manager or anybody, be as responsive as you can all the time. And people are always going to appreciate that, and they're always going to speak highly of you if you do that. So that's part of the professionalism piece, I guess, but it really goes a long way. So I guess the other thing, yeah. Yeah, so for me it's a little bit different because I'm a manager now. But when I was coding, I definitely had like a block of time I would code, and then I would go look at my messages and respond to them. For me, it was dependent on the project I was working on, because sometimes I needed a little bit longer, but I would usually give myself a good hour at least. And there was also times of the day that I would set aside for doing pull requests, what I was just talking about, reviewing each other's code. So in the beginning, when I first got into work, I didn't look at my own code unless all the pull requests were done. So, because nobody can work unless the pull requests are done. So it's about managing your time. So you set that time aside for yourself or for others. And I don't want to get too deeply into that because it's kind of maybe won't make sense or it's not going to retain anyway. But he makes a good point. The main thing is you do have to set some time aside. So, everything is within reason. But we do not want to make people wait a really long time when they're waiting for an answer and then they're blocked. It can't help anybody. I like to use the test to more clearly answer your question of if it was my wife and it wasn't an emergency, right? If it's not an emergency, my wife, it's never been an emergency, but so if it's my wife, how long am I going to make her wait, right? And it kind of seems like a silly test, but I might make her wait an hour, and that's fine, right? She's fine with that. So everyone else should be fine with that. So an hour is a perfectly amount of time, and I can code plenty. If you think 2 hours is fine for you, if you think I don't know how many of you are married, but if you think 2 hours is fine for your spouse, then make it 2 hours for you. It's up to you. But that is, I don't want to make my wife wait 2 hours. So that's up to you, I guess. So, all right, I was going, before you interrupted me with your question, I was going to the next thing. Oh, so one thing we were going I'm just kidding. So we were going to talk a little bit about cultural differences when you work with a team, and one thing we were talking outside that was kind of interesting was, so I work in Arizona. Everybody know where Arizona is? Yeah?
Impressive. I have no idea where I am in the world right now.
Yeah, so Arizona is in over by California, and just so you all know, it's 41 degrees Celsius there right now, so I love the weather here. And so it is, the cultural differences between working in Arizona and New York, where he is, and New York to Minsk are actually, they're bigger between Arizona and New York in a lot of ways. Cultural differences aren't always between countries, or it's a lot of times even just between how different offices act. So I think the biggest thing that you always want to remember, whether you're doing a pull request or you're talking to someone on Slack or whatever, is just don't write things like you speak. That's the biggest thing. That's almost all things that I have to deal with as a manager, is because someone wrote something and then someone complains about it, and then the other person says, well, I didn't mean it that way. It's really easy just to think in your head, like, how can I write this nicely? And a lot of times all that means is putting a happy face emoji on it or something like that, right? So it's really easy to say something sarcastically or in a certain way where, I may say that way to Eric or someone else that I know, but I don't want to write that in Slack or on a pull request or in an email, because that is not going to be taken well by someone that doesn't know me in the same way or at all maybe. We've only had an interaction in a small way through Slack. So we always want to treat that in a very carefully, because feelings can get hurt, and then the big deal about that is, and it will happen, it'll happen to you. So the reason that's so important is not just because feelings are so important, but when you're upset, it's really hard to code. When somebody offends you, if I call you a name, I don't know how explicit you want me to get on here, so I'll refrain, but if you say something terrible to someone, or at least they view it that way, it's really hard for that person to code. So, you're really costing, the company money, and productivity, and it's just not a good situation for anyone. So, and it's usually an accident, but it's just something to be aware of. So I think those are the biggest things that when you first join a company, those are the things that you can do to like come on, or in that last case, not do, and just really impress. And then there's the technical stuff that they're preparing you for that is not, that I'm not going to talk about, that is, you know, obviously, I don't want to say more important, but important. and that is, but the things that happen on those first couple of days are hard to overcome with your technical skills, right? If you're an awesome coder, it's hard to overcome being not a nice person. People don't want to work with not nice people. If you're a jerk, I'm not going to work with you. I'm gonna get rid of you really quick. And I'm really going to try not to hire jerks, no matter how good they are. And so that's my number. I tell everyone when I talk to them for the first time when I'm hiring them that I don't hire jerks. And I tell them that in hopes that if they're a jerk, they don't want to come work for me. So that is, I don't know how effective. Well, I'm hoping that they just don't go on to the next step. Yeah. I'm hoping they just don't never come interview. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean, I don't know. It might not work at all. You may be right. But at least they know. So anyway, yeah. So I know that was me kind of talking at you. So do you have questions about other things? Do you have curiosities or anything about other things that are maybe non-technical about your first days or anything about what I said? Top three. I love lists like top three. Yeah. Okay. Top three skills. Top three soft skills are punctuality. And when I say punctuality, I don't just mean you being on time, but delivering everything on time. Being polite. So that goes back to just, you know. And I think, you know, a far third is, let's see. And by the way, I don't like to call them soft skills because that makes them sound like they're less important. But yeah, they are. I like to call them the important skills. But anyway, yeah, I'd say those are the two most important. But yeah, I don't know. There's a third one. Those are definitely the two things that I'd say are the biggest ones. Do I what? So I think humor is important when you're like co-located, right? So if like this was a workspace and we were all working, humor is very important, right? Because it helps you get rid of like anxiety and stuff. But when you are working like and you don't know someone as well, it can be kind of dangerous, right? So I would use humor a lot with the people that you're working closely with. So in that office, that's good to use humor with those people. But when you're working with people that are maybe not in the same office as you, I would use it sparingly because sometimes it may not get interpreted the way you think. And they won't ever tell you. They'll just wait and let it fester, and then one day you'll get a complaint and you'll be like, oh, I didn't know I did that. So, but yeah, I mean, humor is important, and we're all going to tell jokes and stuff, and you know, that's how we get rid of our stress and anxiety from coding and from dealing with the other coders and from dealing with project managers and from dealing with our CEOs and all that kind of stuff. So that, yeah, no, that's super important. I just didn't know how my jokes would go over because there's a language barrier a little bit, and this is being recorded. So, yeah. And the other thing I would say, one thing that's really important is, you know, I know you guys are here and you're involved now. As you grow in your career, it becomes a little less, you may see a little less benefit to yourself in staying involved in the community. And for myself, I run the Ruby organization in Phoenix, and I yeah, thank you. And that's the only woo I've ever gotten for that. And I've taught some boot camps there, and I speak at a couple of boot camps there. Surprisingly, this is not my first time doing this, I know. And humor for you. And so we see it didn't go over very well. And so but staying involved in that community has 100% helped my career in ways that when I was doing it, I did not understand, right? But it got me a good job in the beginning, and then it got me a better job, and then it got me an even better job, and then it got me this job. And to be honest, I got offered even a better job than this one, but I turned it down. He already knew about that, so I can say it. But now the whole world knows. Great, I shouldn't have said that. But anyway, yeah, so when I say better, it obviously wasn't better I stayed, but it was better money and stuff. So we don't feel like, oh, I went to that boot camp and I joined the community and now I got a job and I got a career, I'm done. I don't need it. Giving back to that community gives back to you tenfold. And monetarily and financially is what I mean. So, also just in what you're doing. I mean, this is maybe different for different people, but me doing things like helping out other people. I've helped out a lot of people, and it's always surprising to me when they come back, 6 months later, and say, "Oh, thank you, I finally got this job," or whatever. That like that stuff sticks with me a lot more than the code I wrote 6 months ago, right? I'm sure he can attest to the same thing. The people that come back to you, that is a lot more valuable. The people that you help, and the people that tell you that, or even the people that don't tell you that, that is what makes you human, and that's what's going to stick with you as a person. The code that you write 2 years from now is going to be erased 5 years from now, and nobody's ever going to know it. So it's the people that make the difference. Yeah. Yeah. So he's asking if I ever don't know people, for the people in the video, and that know me, and that happens all the time. And in fact, it happens at the Ruby AZ meeting. Ruby AZ is what we call it, and it's horrible. And I'm really horrible with names, and so yeah, it happens all the time. But I got to roll with the punches. I usually use humor in that situation. Like, I wish I could run fast right now. But anyway, cool. So I'm going to let Eric take over and scratch your technical itch, and I'll bump him if I think that he is talking too fast or too high level, or maybe you can do that. Cool?
That's fair. That's a bad term. So, hello everyone. So, a couple of things that I wanted to touch on are very involved in like technical process and how development gets done. So one thing I think is very important is how we assess engineers in Freshly. And I would say this: technical skills is one column. It is a single column, and we call it technical mastery, and that's it. If you're the best technical person there is, that gets you 1 out of 5 stars. If you want to get promoted, if you want to go up in your career, if you want to be a mid-level developer, a senior developer, a principal engineer, technical mastery is one of the things you need. Critically important, but more important are the other skills. And the main skill we assess for all of our engineers is teamwork. We live and die as a team. Because we have a code review process, if you review my code and you deny it, it doesn't get merged. So it doesn't matter if I write it really, really fast or really, really slow. It matters after you review it that it gets merged. So if you think about it that way, the best engineers aren't necessarily the engineers that produce the most code. They're the engineers that merge the most code. And merging code and writing code are very different things. Oftentimes, I will say the most value you can bring to a company is doing a pull request review. Because if you're reviewing someone else's code, it goes in. And I'll say this: when you're sitting at your computer typing, you're not coding, you're transcribing. You're just putting into the computer the software you wrote in your head. That's why we call it software. It doesn't actually exist. You make it up. You tell the computer how it ought to work, and then it does that for you. And it will do it perfectly every time. The only bugs you will ever encounter in your whole career, unless you work in something super weird, is logic error. You will have told the computer to do something unintentionally because you didn't understand the case. And so the main defense against that is good testing. So if you take those two things together, the most value you can provide to an organization is really understanding testing and really understanding the software. Understanding where it's going to break, where we didn't cover the edge case, what the product manager didn't think of, what happens if the user tries to log out if they're already logged out. One thing you will never be able to do, and this is a real shame because you have given this ability away when you became a software engineer, you will never be a user again. Users are special and they're weird. They do things you will never expect because you think like a software developer. Users think like users. They're gonna do crazy nonsense and you're never gonna expect it and your system's gonna break, guaranteed. There is not a single person in this room that won't cause a production error, guaranteed. So when you think about your life and your happiness, you don't want to be producing bugs. You don't want to come into work and fix bugs from 2 weeks ago, from 2 months ago, from 2 years ago. So really focus on quality, because quality ends up being the metric that keeps you as a developer the happiest. If you write one really good, solid piece of code that does one thing really well, it never needs to change. And that's a very important lesson, especially inside of Ruby, is this idea of solid code. Solid is a great principle. I don't want to bore you with the actual mechanics of it because it's very dense, but I would heavily encourage you to look into it. SOLID is critically important in the Ruby design pattern, and I want to explain why. Imagine you're building a house of cards, right? You set up your little house and you do your little things and you have your triangles and you build this all up, and now your house of cards is 20 feet tall. And I'm going to ask you to go in to the very bottom, at the very floor, in the very center of your house of cards, and I want you to replace the ace of spades with the queen of hearts. How excited are you to do that? Probably not very. If you said excited, stop what you're doing. That's not right. It's very dangerous, and what you're going to do is break everything. Even in a best case scenario, nothing bad happens. You should not shoot for a scenario where the best case is nothing bad happens. When code exists, it exists. And that's very important. We as developers will always want to refactor and to change and to update and to clean up and to rewrite in Vue instead of React. It's a natural thing that we will want to do, and you have to stop yourself. Because at the end of the day, code is code. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. And if you build your code properly, you will never have a thing that does more than one thing. And that's a very important design choice that you need to make as an engineer as you're understanding and building out your technology. What is the responsibility of my object? And here's a really easy test for you to know if you're doing well. If you describe your object as, my object does X, and you started failing. And that's a really easy test, and it's very simple, and it's actually quite possible to build, and it's something I would encourage you to start thinking about as you architect. And that is the one most important detail that I can share with you. The thing that kills productivity more than anything else in an organization is refactoring in a commit that hasn't been merged. If you've ever gotten a pull request review and somebody leaves a comment that says, hey, there's a better way to write this. You could move this and change this and do that. They might be right. It might be better. Your code might not actually be very good, but does it work? Because that's the only thing that matters. Software must work. Everything else doesn't matter. If you show me perfect, clean, indented, nice code, and it's broken, I don't care. It has to work. And it doesn't have to work fast. It has to work. Don't optimize before it works, because you may optimize your Ferrari by bolting it to the ground. Don't do that. Think of your code as a living, breathing organism. It's like bringing a child into the world. You have to nurture it. You have to understand what it's supposed to do, what it wants in its life, and then at some point, is where it gets a little dark, you might have to kill it. So that's where it stops being a child, but that's an important part of code. Sometimes code outlives its usefulness, and you need to be comfortable letting go. And I will say this, if ever you think that the code that you just wrote is the best code you've ever wrote in your life, you're 100% correct. The code that you write today is the best code you'll ever write. Tomorrow, the code that you wrote yesterday is dog shit. It happens every time. I don't know why, but it's true. This is a real story I will share. At one point, I was looking into a bug, and I right-clicked into the file, and I read through, and I kept digging, and I found the line where the bug was. And I said out loud to my coworkers, which one of you idiots did this? And then I checked the blame log. It was me. I forgot. And guess what? 2 lines above, there was a comment from myself that said, it happened again, didn't it? That's software. It's hard, it's unpredictable, and it's gonna blow up on you. If you expect perfection, you will be disappointed. If you expect that this is going to be a hard challenge, you're a software engineer. This is what you've opted into. Complexity is your life, and understanding how to manage it is the #1 talent that will separate you from junior to mid to senior. The main thing that I think defines a senior developer is laziness. Lazy developers don't want to write a lot of code, they want to close a lot of tickets. If you can write 1 line of code that closes 1 ticket, that's awesome. I think 8 lines of code that does the same job. Was that?
Also easy to review.
Also easy to review. And that's a really important talent here that I will encourage you to think about, right? If I ask you to look over 1 line of code and tell me if there's any bugs, what do you think the chances are you could find one? Probably 100% if it existed, because it's 1 line of code. What if it was 100 lines of code? Chances probably go down, you gotta think harder, you gotta look more. What if it's 15,000 lines of code and 20,000 lines of changes to a test, all in one big massive PR where the name of it is fix stuff? It's not gonna go well for your reviewer. They're not gonna know what to do, that's gonna get stuck in review forever, but guess what? If you push 12 lines of code up in a pull request and you ask somebody to review it, you know what they're gonna do? They're gonna look at it and they're gonna go, huh, yeah, that's 12 lines of code that does what it says. Looks good to me, merge. You're done. If you put up 10 12-line pull requests in a day, you've written 120 lines of code. Is that impressive? No. You know what's impressive? You merged 12 tickets. Think before you code. And that is the one thing that I will always say will save time. An architecture meeting is the thing that has defined for our company efficiency. When you and another person sit down together to talk about the software you think you want to write, before you ever write a single line of it, you will be amazed at how many ideas you come up with, throw away, and keep iterating on. I sat in an architecture meeting at Freshly where we had some particular challenge that was, I don't remember, it was like click a button, make a thing, do some stuff, doesn't really matter. At the end of the day, in this meeting, the 2 engineers that sat together to do the architecture started the conversation with, well, this is gonna be a big build. We're gonna have to build a new front end, we're gonna have to build a new front end model, we're gonna have to build a new Ajax call, we're gonna have to build a new back end call, we're gonna have to build a new endpoint, we're gonna have to build a new table. So already this is 2 weeks worth of work for 2 engineers. And they have constructed all of this based on a 3-line spec that said, we want to be able to copy this to there. So they talked about it and they said, well, what if we didn't do that? What if we just sent one thing to the back end that said copy X and it just did it? And they're like, ooh, that's pretty exciting. Oh, but that's kind of annoying because we already have all the technology on the front end to just push what we want as the thing. So the other engineer said, well, what if we just only do it on the front end? And he looked at the other guy and he looked at the other guy and they said, wow, I think we can just do this on the front end. And guess what? They did, and they finished it that day. It went from a 2-week project where at the end of that project they would probably have gotten into that exact same conversation in the review 2 weeks later and realized, oh shit, we built the crap out of this and we should not have. This could have been 2 lines on the front end, and instead it's 20,000 lines across 4 different technology stacks. That 20-minute conversation saved 14 days worth of 2 people's time. That is value. What is not value is that exact same meeting happening after those 2 weeks have been spent and that code exists. Because again, the only thing that matters is, does it work? I have an expression I use at work a lot, which is kind of gruesome, so bear with me. It's called, there's many ways to skin a cat. And it's really the idea that there are a lot of solutions to any given problem, and it's going to be very difficult for you in your life as a software engineer to appropriately assess what solution is superior. And this is something that you will come to grow to despise when you're talking with people in architecture meetings, which is called bike shedding. I think that it's better if we add 2 than remove 4, and you think it's better if we remove 4 and then add 2. And we go back and forth debating about and they're equivalent solutions. There's no difference between them, and we don't know that because we don't know what success is. So when you start an architecture meeting, when you start any software project, what is most important, and this is what you must push on your tech leads, on your mentors, on your product managers, on your business to give you, is context. If I come to you and say, build me a button that does a thing, and you're like, okay, that will be 6 weeks worth of work, and the company says, cool, go, that's bad. If they come to you and say, I need something that does this, what do you think we could do? And you say, oh, I could just write a script that does that. How often do you need it? And they're like, once a year? Great solution. How long will that take? 20 minutes? Done. Context is decisive. If I do this, what is this? Is this a thumb? Is this a finger? Is it the number 1? Is it the direction up? It means all of those things depending on the context. If I said, how many is this? It's 1. If I said, what is this? It's a thumb. It's the same thing, and it changes its shape depending on how you look at it. That's software in a nutshell. If you know that what you need to do is support high volume traffic, that's your success metric. You can now debate the solution of, is yours faster than mine or not? If speed isn't a problem, you talk about complexity. Is yours easier to read than mine or not? I have seen code that is terribly performant that I would rather see than the performant version of it. Because sometimes performance isn't everything. Clarity is. And the last thing I want to leave you with before opening for questions is one nugget of truth that I have found over my life. You code in the car on your way to work. When you get to work, you forget all of the coding that you've done and you sit down to start typing, and that's when you enter a different mind. Don't try and do both at the same time. Go for a walk when you want to code. When you want to create pull requests, sit down at your keyboard and type in the solution. Hold the world in your head. Oh, sorry. What I'm trying to say is think through the solution before you start coding. And I know there is a very real temptation, especially when you're young in the development life cycle, where you want to just throw some code at the wall and see what sticks. And that's helpful, but it's not effective. What's effective is thinking through the problem in your own mind and reorganizing it, because you think at the speed of light and you code at the speed of typing. So your mind will always outpace your fingers as you type, and if you are thinking of the solution while you're writing it, you're doing both of those things poorly. If you think of your solution, write it on a piece of paper, draw it on a whiteboard, work it out before you code it, then when you sit down, you're just transcribing. It's like taking notes versus typing them into your computer. And I think that's a really important thing for you to understand in your life. Understanding complexity is what will determine your success from junior to mid to senior. The most senior developers hear a request for something that's hard and go, build a spreadsheet uploader. That's where you want to think about it. When you understand the problem, you swing a hammer once and you fix all of your issues. And I've always told people, I don't get paid to swing the hammer, I get paid to know where to aim. And I think that's a very critical thing for you to understand as you grow as a software developer. Knowing why is more important than knowing how. And that will be true no matter what seniority you are, no matter what company you work at. It will always be the context that's decisive. So that's what I have to say for you. Yes?
I'll just assume you guys are applauding because I was taking the mic. But I learned this lesson. I didn't have someone like Eric to tell me that. And when I was a junior developer, I was doing exactly that. I was just coding. And then it dawned on me that every morning, the next day, I would come into work and I would know the solution and I would be able to code it out. And it's because I was thinking about what I was coding the day before. So when I started doing that before and really whiteboarding things, so to speak, or taking notes in a notebook and spending as much time as I could doing that, it just became easy. And so I just wanted to double down on what he's saying. Of everything he's saying, that's the biggest point that I would say is just spend as much time as you can thinking about what you're coding and writing it down before you start coding. And it just makes everything so much easier. I don't know how much time you spent talking about that here, but anyway, I would emphasize. I just wanted to emphasize that point. Did you have questions for Eric?
I hope we have a conversation about your idea that fastest is the best solution, because it's not always true, right?
Sorry, what do you mean?
You say like fastest solution, like changing line of code is always the best solution, but it's not. In the long run, you have to, because when you're doing all the fastest solutions, you end up with a shitty code when you end up with like you need to replace everything, like whole system from scratch, right?
I will say this. Yes, true. And I have seen people work very slowly, and that exact same thing happens. They very slowly build a system, and then we throw it away because it wasn't actually right.
That's where like software architects need to keep a balance between speed and balance. So how do you keep this balance? What's your inner feeling for this?
That's a great question. I think the difficulty for keeping the balance between speed and bugs is really the criticality of the bug, because that ends up being a very important factor. And this is something that, again, I'm a very realistic person, so I don't believe in like code purity or like the idea that there's an ideal solution. It's not how it works. I've worked at companies for long enough to know if you have a charge job that's supposed to run and it doesn't, that's really bad. Guess what? You don't get fired when that happens. They say, oh my God, run the job, whatever it takes. That's software. It doesn't necessarily matter how often it breaks. It matters if you can fix it. And that, I think, is the most important part of bugs. It's not about how much damage the bug does, because there will be bugs, they will deal damage. It's about how quickly you can find the defect. And that's what good testing is supposed to give you. It eliminates possibilities. If you have a ton of unit tests around your system and no integration tests, I can probably tell you where your system is going to break. If you have a lot of integration tests and no unit tests, your system is probably not going to break. I don't know why people write unit tests. They do, and they don't write integration tests, and that's why. I think at the end of the day, when you think about what your software needs to do, think of it in terms of what you're supporting. Oftentimes I've seen in software, and I'm sure you've all seen a line like this somewhere, there's a case statement where it says, in a comment, this should never happen but, and then there's a bunch of business logic there, and then there's a bunch of tests around it. Why? It should never happen. If it does happen, guess what that is? It's an exceptional situation. And you know what happens in exceptional situations? You raise an exception. You say, this is weird and I didn't expect it, broken. And that is a very important trait that I would encourage you all to do. Let errors be errors. You're going to have bugs. Don't outsmart yourself. Your server will break for your customers, full stop. It is unavoidable. High traffic, high load, the instability of the internet, some hacker group, at some point, your server will return a 500 and a customer will see a sad panda page. That's the nature of the business.
Can I answer his question a little bit more directly?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So it's a good point, and I think you're right. So the question, just for the people in the video, was if you do the fastest thing all the time, you're going to get not the best code, and you're going to eventually end up with a big pile of shit. So how is that true? So the reality is in a silo, if you're the only person on a project, that's 100% true, right? Especially if you're not an expert and you don't know what you're doing, but even if you are, that's true. So, but in a company that has, so what we do is we have a process, and you heard him talking about the architecture meeting. So when you get a feature, you have an architecture meeting with usually two other software engineers, and you have that meeting, and kind of like we were talking about, where you talk about how you're going to implement the feature. So now you know how to implement it, right? So that meeting took all the time off. So that fastest way is the way that you guys decided to do it. Does that make sense? So then we implement that code, and then it goes through it still has to go through a pull request that says, oh yeah, we did it that way, and now it works in the correct way, and it's tested properly. So it still, what we want to avoid is we decided to do it this way, we implemented it, it works. We're not going to go then rewrite it a whole bunch of times, because that slows things down. Does that make sense? So the way we're avoiding bugs is by talking about it a bunch at the beginning, kind of like what he was saying. By having meetings and saying, every feature, we're going to get together and we're going to talk about the best way to implement this, and then we implement it, instead of just, so it's not necessarily as cut and dry as just implement it the first way. Does that make sense? There's a fair amount of thought that goes into it before starting just write code. Yeah, it's not like, oh, this is definitely going to need a controller, so I'm going to add that. And yeah, we're doing a fair amount of architecture before the code is being written.
The best fail story? Oh my God, yes. Okay, cool. So let me tell you about Catterday. Catterday was very fun, and the cat. No, I have no names, no. Engineering is you just throw whoever the last guy was under the bus, doesn't even matter their name. Tried and true tradition. Anyway, Catterday, the cat is short for catastrophe, because this was really fucking bad. Our Catterday was when Freshly decided to start delivering meals on Sunday. We had never done this before. We're a meal delivery company. We cook food, we put it in a box, we ship it to you, you put the food in your microwave, you eat it. That's our business model. We never delivered on Sunday because we couldn't get anyone to drop the boxes off. So we found someone. So they're like, hey, can we do this? And we're like, yeah, sure, we'll just add Sunday. What could go wrong? And then 3 months later, we finally finished fixing the bug that required us to recode 25% of our entire production application, which at that point was hundreds and thousands of lines of code. It was immense, and the bug was awesome. We had decided in our best interests that dates are easy. How hard could date math be, right? If today is Tuesday, tomorrow is Wednesday, the day after is Thursday, easy as shit. So easy, we don't need to centralize it. Let's sprinkle some business logic here in the front end, how we compute dates. Let's put a little here in the back end. Shit, you know what? Let's copy paste both of those, change, and put them over here too. Let's just get it everywhere, right? Dates are dates are dates. They never change. Okay, kind of true. But then you have to add one little bit. We needed to figure out what menu to show you. And we do different meals week over week, so we have a weekly menu. So when we went to compute, that little bit of date math that we put everywhere had the following logic to it in every one of those little different places that it lived. Your weekly menu is determined by the Sunday of the week that you get your delivery. That works out almost all the time, except when your delivery is Sunday. In the case that it is Sunday, that means your weekly menu is the menu of the week on the day that you got your food, which means somehow our system thought we could cook and ship food instantaneously around the country if it was Sunday. That was not true. And so as a result, every one of our Sunday delivery customers got the wrong menu and added meals they couldn't get, and it broke production, and it raised huge alarms, and all of our systems stopped, and we all scrambled to figure out what happened. And then we did. And we found out, oh, this meal shouldn't be in this person's cart. The facility can't cook it. The system's throwing a shit fit. Everything's on fire. What can we do? The facility called me and said, hey, there's a meal on here we can't cook. And I'm like, I know, I'm sorry. And they're like, well, there's like 12 of them. You want us to just cook them and throw them in the box? And I'm like, oh, God, you can just do that? And they're like, yeah, sure. So they kind of papered over the bug for us for the customer's benefit, but we had to actually fix it because it was a real critical defect that would cause us real problems when we were at scale. At 11, it's not an issue. At 1100, it's a real big problem. So we had to go and consolidate the business logic into one place to fix the logic bug that said, actually, your menu is the Sunday of the week where we cook your food, because we have to cook your food a day before we ship it to you, and that fixed the bug. The 20% of our code was just tying together that one little easy, can't break, same everywhere bit of business logic, and that's what dry is. We had a non-dry code base, and because we repeated the same bug, nefarious, small, untested, not a use case, all over the code base, we had to fix it all over the code base. And it was honestly the hardest thing that we've ever done. We had to rebuild the whole stack of software while the production app was broken for 3 months, and every Tuesday, we had Catterday Swap. First it was Catterday Swap, then it was Catterday Swap 2, Electric Boogaloo. By the end, it was the July 28th Catterday Swap. It just got bad. And when we finally finished and fixed and pulled the trigger, oops, we introduced a critical logic bug and every one of our servers started crashing because it ran out of memory. Uh-oh, we didn't test for that. We couldn't. It failed in QA. We've been working for 3 months we scrambled, and guess what? We just hot fixed it. Nobody knew the servers were broken for a couple of minutes, except now that it's on video forever. So, but generally speaking, that's how this works. You would be surprised what you can get away with as an engineer, because everyone's stressed out when the lights are red, but if you make them go green, you're suddenly the hero, even if you're the one who made them go red. It's the nice part of our job. So, yeah, that's my fail story. Thank you, thank you. Any other questions?
You were talking about productivity in distributed teams, right? And you mentioned politeness, you mentioned professionalism and punctuality. Is there anything else for guys to know, to learn from you, that can basically influence their future productivity when working in the teams?
I think so. One thing I would say, just because you reminded me of it in talking, I think one very critical trait to touch on, especially as you talk to and interview at companies, especially when you're more on the junior side of development and you don't have a lot of chops to show, the thing that we use to determine who the junior developers are that we want to invest in is how good the questions they ask us are. If we're on a phone screen with you and I'm asking you hey, do you have any questions for me? And you go, yeah, what's your development process like? How does code get merged there? How many bugs do you have per week? How often do software developers stay late? I'm gonna be like, wow, this person's head is totally in the game. They know exactly what they wanna know about this company. I'm excited because I think they'll be dedicated. Same person on the phone, I ask that question, you go, no, I don't really have any questions. I'm like, okay, cool, thanks for your time. And that's it. So really invest in and be authentic, ask what you want to know about, because if you really don't want to know anything, that should be a red flag to you. So that's, I think, one part of the hiring. I think in terms of the efficiency, pushback is going to be my favorite answer here. I think this is the number one tool in every developer's toolbox is pushback. If somebody leaves a comment on your code that says, hey, there's a better way to do this, you don't have to follow them just because they're a reviewer. You can push back. You can say, cool, thanks for the feedback. Now I know that for next time. And if they say to you, oh, but this way is inferior. It's broken. It causes defects. I say the same thing to everyone, and this is the test that I think will answer your question. Show me. Give me a broken test case. That is the most effective and efficient way for you to communicate with any developer when you want a change. Your opinion is an opinion. You will get into fights about your opinion because opinions can be wrong. A test is a test. If I reply to your PR and I say, I think you could have done better, you're probably gonna say, fuck this guy. What does he know? If I reply to your PR with a test that breaks when you run it, and you read the test code and you think it ought to work, how easy is that comment? You can't argue with it, you can't fight with it, you can't get into an endless debate about the quality of it. It is a broken test on your software, fix it. That accelerates.
The other benefit, one second, the other benefit of that is that will make you, that will help level you up a lot faster. Help writing tests on other people. When you can write tests on other people's PRs, that means you understand their PR and you are, so you're doing a good PR, but also you're just, that'll help level you up very fast. Go ahead.
– 100%. I agree completely that it is contentious, and I want you to live in that contention. One thing that I will say is at the end of the day, if you find a company that you can work at where they don't care how long it takes you to get your code merged, never leave. You have found a magical unicorn where the bosses don't care if you want to drink root beer all afternoon and push 2 lines. Like, that's the reality of it. Speed is the name of our game. If you are the best developer, you work quickly, you get clean code merged, and you never have bugs. I have met exactly 0 of these people in my entire life. They don't exist as far as I have ever met. When I'm talking about pushback, what I am saying is pushback on opinions. You can have the opinion that I totally miswrote this entire thing, and maybe you're right. But if it's not broken, then it's not broken. And a company, and I have worked at many, will always choose, hey, if we have a working solution that we can't prove is broken, why would we spend time rewriting it for the sake of rewriting it? If there are legitimate reasons because it's not going to work, prove it. If you can document a failing test case, there is no ego. You are fighting a robot. You can't have ego against failure lights. You can only fix them. And if you try, you'll look like Don Quixote fighting a windmill. It's a robot that tells you you're wrong, and if you can't come up with a test that proves why their code is inferior, then it's not. It's just opinion. If you can, it's broken, great. And that's good for benchmarking as well. If you think a piece of code is too inefficient, benchmark it. If you can't prove that that code isn't efficient, then it is. That's the nature of that, and that's what I'm saying. Like, if somebody leaves an opinion, push them for a failing test case. Yes?
Do you have an exception here when you put in the comments saying, I don't understand what this thing does?
100%. That is very, very important, and this is the critical thing that I will say. 100%, yes, but this is very critical, right? Oh yeah, sorry. His question was, probably paraphrase here, what if somebody's comment is, I don't understand this? That's a very good comment, and this is one of those areas that this is the gray area and why the soft skills are the important skills. If you leave I've gotten into a debate with my boss before where he said, I don't understand what the variable uncharged weekly orders means, and I said, try reading it. Because I was frustrated, and he didn't want me to merge my code, and my frustration showed, and it decayed very quickly. And there will always be those kind of opinion pushbacks that are very bad. And this is why we have style guides. One area that's very clear to pushback is naming. Naming is hard. It is the hardest skill that you will acquire as a developer, and it is the most important. My favorite comments in PRs are when people say, don't use a single letter variable. And I used to push back and say, why? Everyone knows for I in an I loop. Great, but what if you have a nested loop and now you have I's and J's and I don't know if an I or a J, like it's confusing. And guess what? We don't charge by the character. You can type I or index and it's the same code efficiency. This is the key that I will leave for you here. You do not write code for the computer. You write it for the person who follows you. Your computer will parse and understand complete gibberish. If you have ever looked at minified JavaScript, you will understand what I am talking about. That renders perfectly. If you gave me minified JavaScript as your pull request, as your source code, I would reject it because I can't understand it. And this is the key here, right? Think of the other people who are coming next. And when you're asking about your names, really ask the question, is this the appropriate name? I have seen names for things like Big Red Ball, and guess what? There's no small red ball, there's no big blue ball, there's just one ball, and it happens to be big and red, and for whatever reason, we decided to name it Big Red Ball because I guess we like typing a lot. This is the idea of naming. Use it to disambiguate and provide clarity, and that I think gets to the heart of your point. If you can show that this is confusing, I would be amazed because I don't know how to do that. But you need to make a good faith argument with your other developers and say, I just don't understand. Can you help me understand? And if they give you a little bit of context to explain it, guess what? That's what a comment is. And that's one of the most effective ways I've seen comments happen. I've gone through pull requests and somebody has said, this isn't clear to me, and somebody else has explained it and they've said, wow, that's very clear, and then they merge it. And then the next time a developer comes along, the same question, the same line of code, we just started putting those explanations as comments above it. Because guess what? When you have Big Red Ball and the comment above it says, initialize a ball that is big and red, I could piece that one together. That's the difficulty with naming. Really focus in on what you're trying to call out for the other developers because that's where they're going to live and die.
All right, so I have a third one to add to my list for you. So this is not about interpersonal relationships, something you've all experienced up to this point, I'm sure, but rather the biggest thing is you need to have faith in yourself. And it's a little bit, so when you're coding, you need to just, sometimes we get so frustrated, and I'm sure it seems like you back there are senior and you can probably relate to this. Like we get to a certain point and we're like, especially like when we're closer to, you're like, you get a feature and you're like, I have no idea how this is done. Like when that thought first creeps into your head, you have to remember that a week ago you did something that you had no idea how that was done, but you did it, you figured it out. And everything you're going to be able to figure out. And you have to, just because you don't know how to do it right now, you're going to do it. So you always have to tell yourself, I'll do it, I'll figure it out, and I can. And that's not just like a motivational thing. The point is that confidence that you have helps you push back the doubt and the frustration. Because when you're frustrated, it's really hard to code. So the point is we don't want to be frustrated, okay? And also to help with that, one thing to keep in mind is we get onto a team and there's a bunch of other developers there and we compare ourselves versus them. And like if I try and compare myself to Eric, I like feel crappy about myself. And I just have to talk to my like PMs and my other people that are asking features. And to them, what I do is magic. They have no idea how this stuff shows up in the internet. All the stuff you guys can do now from just a short amount of time, to most people it's like, oh my, what are they doing? It's like they're so smart, and just remind yourself of that constantly. Yeah. Okay, so that's super important. So you're sitting here now, you may be thinking like, you're gonna go work somewhere and sit next to someone that knows what they're doing, and you may feel a certain way like you don't know enough or whatever. Compared to most people, what you do is awesome, and I think it's awesome. But to them, it's like, magic. So that's the way I want you to think about it. That's the way I think about it. That's why I love it. It's like, it's not just a living. It's like it's something I get to create. And so I get excited about that, and I love Ruby, and I'm super glad that you guys are part of the community now. And so thank you for that, and maybe we'll get to work with you someday, if Eric didn't scare you away.
One last question. In terms, like, we are talking to the audience, is mostly junior developers or future junior developers. And in terms of career planning, you mentioned that the technical mastery will give only 1 point out of 5. So what are the rest 4 points?
Great question. So the 4 points we track, we break them down into 2 spheres. One of them is about accountability, and the other is about guidance. And the way that we phrase them is really in these 2 forms. One of these is autonomy. And autonomy, the way we think of autonomy, is that you, as a developer, can solve your own problems. If you have an issue and you come to me and say, hey, I don't understand this issue, you're solving your own problem. You're asking for help. I will never punish anyone for asking for help because we all start not knowing anything and everything we learn. So if you go out of your way to unblock yourself, you are an autonomous developer, and I love that. That's how you get promoted. If you have an issue and you go, that's hard, and then you don't tell anybody, that's bad. I now have to check in with you tomorrow and be like, hey, how's that project going? And you're like, fine, because you're frustrated and you're stressed and you're new and you don't want me to think you have no idea what you're doing. And oh my God, you're going to get fired because you just got hired and you're asking such a basic question. Nowhere works like that. Ask the questions, get the knowledge, get the guidance, and do that on your own. If I have to push you to ask questions, that's where we rate you low in autonomy, and that's where you have some room for growth. The other piece that I would say inside of autonomy is how willing you are to go solve your own problems. And this is somewhat related, but also different. A perfect example here is, let's say you come up with an edge case that isn't in the spec. You have a nice ticket, it's been written by a great PM, they've covered almost everything except this one case. What do? Do you go ask your leader, hey, this isn't covered in my test case, I don't know what to do? Do you go, that sucks, and then do nothing? Do you go directly to the product manager and ask them? That's how we think. When I think of a tech lead, I think of somebody who, when they encounter a problem, they get together the group of people who can make the decision about the problem, and they come to a solution, and then they implement it. When you come up with an issue and you proactively solve it, that to me shows leadership, that shows knowledge, that shows more than autonomy. It shows that you're motivated to solve your own problems, and that's very important. The other 2 sides of that are guidance, and guidance is where, how much do I have to sit with you and show you where things go? If I'm architecting your solution for you, you need a lot of guidance, and that will be something you will want in the beginning. And this is a very important, like, when we think of leveling up developers, it's leveling up. If you start very junior and you don't need any guidance, I'm nervous because how are you learning anything? I would rather you sit down with me and have me walk you through the process, and that's very effective. Then from there, you learn a little more, and it's a step-up process. So I would very highly encourage you 2 things. Keep an open mind, and this is the 4th part of guidance, and expect to be wrong. Ask questions, understand, and this is where I would say, speed-wise, you will become a better developer faster delivering reviews than you will writing code. Because when people code, they're going to make the same mistakes you're going to make, and as a reviewer, you will catch them more effectively because it's not your own code. And you'll learn from those mistakes. Once you catch something in a PR, you'll go, oh, I shouldn't write that in my PR because I just commented on their PR that wasn't acceptable. Now you know a little bit more. So always be on the lookout for those learning moments because that's how you accelerate yourself. If I have to ask you, hey, why don't you want to be a mid-level developer? And you're like, oh, I do. And it's like, well, why aren't you doing anything to improve yourself? Why aren't you going to Ruby meetups? Why aren't you mentoring people? Why aren't you being mentored? If you don't have any input in your own career and you're not putting any fuel in your own career's tank, what value is there? That's the really important part. This is your life and it's your career. Know what you want and ask for it. The most effective, and this is the part of guidance, if you tell me, hey, I don't know what I'm doing, I can try and help you, but now I'm solving 2 of your problems. If you come to me and say, I don't understand how React works and I want to learn, can I take a course? I'll give you money and you'll just go learn it. So really know what you want to achieve, because that helps me help you. Good managers are servant leaders. We're here to remove your roadblocks and accelerate you to move faster. That is the key for every tech company I have ever worked at. Hire smart people and get out of their way. You are smart people, and I as a manager want to accelerate you. I want to bring you from junior to mid to senior and then send you off into the world to go do wonderful things. I need you to help me do that. And that's the guidance part, so.
Thank you.
Thank you.